Hello, welcome to the League of Extraordinary Atheists for Humanism, where we attempt to apply logic and reason to religion and politics. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Subject Lightning. Topic Thunder. How you doing, Callie?
Oh my god, Subject Lightning is even dorkier than my actual channel name. But I love it because you said it. I'm very well. It's sort of around about sort of 11 a.m. over here, and God knows what time where you are. So yeah,
it is 6:11 here. But yeah, so hi, how are you doing? How have you been since the last time you were on?
Well, pretty good. I had obviously a bit of a kerfuffle, which we're probably going to talk about today a little bit. But no, really, really good. Looking forward, the season and all that. The happy holidays season is here. You know how I'm avoiding saying Merry Christmas, just in case anybody in the comments like, you can't say that during Atheists. I'm sure they wouldn't, but I thought I'd just.
Well, now you've said it, and now we have to fight about it.
Yeah, we don't have such a huge thing. Even atheists over here say, Merry Christmas. So we don't have such a war on Christmas, sort of thing about it. Yeah, we're pretty laid back about it.
Well, we do like to talk about kerfuffles and cafefes here. So
we do.
I feel like we need to make a shirt that says that. But no, yeah, we are here to talk about a kerfuffle that happened on your channel.
Yes.
Do you want to go over that just a little bit? Just so everyone knows, we are talking about anti-natalism. Mostly, I just wanted to show everyone that I know how to say that word. Though I did say it the wrong way before we went live, but we have nipped that in the butt, and it's absolutely fine now. So if you want to catch us up a little bit.
Thing. It's like when people say schedule or schedule, and people who say schedule need to be stopped. They do need to stop. No, you say it however you want to. There's still the same letters in the same word. So you say it however you want to. I'm not here to judge.
I want to say it like Brad Pitt says bonjour. Bonjour. Anti-Natalism.
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 No, in fact, you know what? Because I'm not a proponent of it, and I don't really think there's any sort of real weight to it. You can call it that for me. You don't have to take it seriously, because I certainly don't. So yeah, however you'd like to say it. Perhaps we'll get some suggestions in the chat of how we should pronounce it.
Yeah, throw some phonetics down in the live chat. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So can you catch us up just a little bit about the video that you did on your channel, which I think was great. I loved it, honestly. And then tell us the reaction you got a little bit.
Well, I decided to speak about antinatalism, although I don't particularly agree with the philosophy, because I had previously seen a news story roughly about a year ago of a young man who was suing his parents. And the news story was in a newspaper in the UK, or rather on their online version, and conceptualized it that he was suing his parents for not getting his consent to be born, which of course, when you hear it in that sort of context sounds pretty ridiculous. And I found it humorous, not necessarily the antinatalist theme around it, rather the fact that, what was he hoping to achieve, and the litigious aspect. I thought it was a bit bonkers. Anyway, I sort of left it, but thought, what an interesting school of philosophy. I'd never really, or principle, I should say, I'd never really heard of it. And then I thought, you know what, I'm gonna touch on that again sometime, merely as a curiosity. And I did a video, and I thought I brought a fairly balanced view to it. And to briefly go over antinatalism, it's basically the philosophical principle stance that it's wrong to procreate, it's morally wrong to procreate, as you are essentially bringing a person into the world without knowing what might befall them. And so you're not morally obliged to bring in a child into the world that may suffer, but you are morally obligated to not bring a child into the world if it can suffer. That's a very sort of broad aspect, but that's basically what the principle is. And one of the main proponents of this, people who speak about it a lot, is a guy called David Benatar, and he's sort of conceptualized a model where I can actually bring it up on my computer, so perhaps we'll go over that in a minute. But basically, the idea is that there's a lot of suffering in life, illness, loss, emotional pain, that sort of thing. Therefore, it's technically wrong to bring in any more children before we either at least alleviate some of the suffering that is already occurring, or because life, that's all life is, basically. Now, given the scope of it, the problem I think I did, that I came across, which I didn't really realise, and that's perhaps my naivete, was that I didn't realise how strongly the people who are proponents of the philosophy feel about it. I was literally looking at the philosophy, seeing where its strengths were that I thought, seeing where its weaknesses were, and then making a video about it. So as a mum, I thought I had a specific view, and I thought it was pretty well balanced. I didn't disagree that there was suffering in life. And for anybody who obviously wants to go watch the video, it's only an 8.5 minute long video, so it doesn't cover the entire wealth of human experience, as you can imagine. But I sort of, gave my case for it, so you can go watch it and see what you think. But the reaction I got was, I think, from people much like our community, where we have a particular idea that we follow, but there's different variants. Some of us are anti-theists, there's all sorts of different people involved and different ways of thinking. And when I got the reaction I did, I then did sort of go do a deep dive into their community and see that there is a great amount of people that are so for it that we can discuss this later, but are a little bit dark and scary sounding. Some people who just genuinely want to alleviate suffering, and then other people that don't really hold it as a strong idea in their minds, but they can certainly understand it, sort of thing. So it's not just to paint them all with the same brush, but the reaction I got, I discussed things like economics and hereditary diseases and things like that in the video, but the reaction I got, I wasn't expecting. And perhaps that was, like I said, it was sort of naivety on my part. And because I had explained that I had a child, it was basically fodder for anyone who disagreed with me to come and say these things. And I got everything from you brought your child into the world to be tortured, literally words like that: torture, suffer, it's all about yourself, you didn't think about them, and all these sorts of things, extremely reactionary stuff. So it was a lot, and it came very quickly, probably because I did actually tag antinatalism in with the video when obviously I was uploading it, because that's what it's about. But I think it spoke to anybody who's of that sort of idea, and of course they've all seen it, and then given their very, very, very reactionary response. So yes, I made a video. A lot of people showed up, left quite vile, some of them were really horrible sort of comments, but it's not really what they said that got to me. It was the nature of, once I sort of got over this sort of massive wave of comments. I've never gotten so many comments so quickly that was so negative. If I have before, it's been peppered in with some nice ones and stuff. So perhaps the idea that there was just so many all at once made me sort of pull away. But when I had a chance to think about it, I think it just tapped into my already present parental fear. You're a dad, you know this. It's always there. And so it made me think. So I've got to thank them for that. It did make me think, but I still don't agree with the philosophy. And I certainly don't agree with the fact that all life is suffering. So yeah, it was just a really odd, very impactful, very unexpected reaction to a video that I thought was actually pretty well balanced. So, and I have actually taken notes today to make sure I didn't warble on, but I've just warbled on. So sorry, Matt.
No, you're fine. Yeah, there's definitely a spectrum of people with like views for this topic. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Because there are some people who are just worried, kind of like economically, and just really just hold like that basic view of, well, life has more like more net pain than it does like net positives, and for that, was just that. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I'm checking my mic real quick. I'm getting rid of the chat. Does this sound better or worse?
You sound a little quiet and tinny.
Let's keep right here. All right, sorry. I'm just going to move on then. Sorry, Reese. I'm hearing that I sound robotic. Not sure how to fix it right now. I apologize.
I like it.
So I'm sorry. Where was I? Trying to fix the sound. I forgot how to make sounds.
About the economic side of things.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, because I think this stance like really does hold a few fair points. I also don't necessarily agree with it, but I think it is a perfectly fine view to have, at least to an extent. Like there's an extreme to every side.
Yes.
And really
and I seem to have attracted a lot of the extreme ones.
yeah. I mean, as you tend to do on the internet and on YouTube. Yeah. The more extreme side really starts at the place of, well, we're all going to go extinct anyways. We should really just make, give ourselves a really good exit strategy and start now like willingly going into the darkness kind of idea, I think. And again, I think that's just like the start.
But didn't you tell me once that you thought of yourself as a bit of a nihilist?
Yes, like okay. Existentially, I suppose. So like, I think that like I like nihilism, honestly, because I think nihilism, like the sense of nihilism, kind of gives you freedom. Like nothing matters. Like objectively, nothing matters. Like in the grand scheme of things, like the universe doesn't really give a shit about you. But as opposed to there is a God, right? And you are made for something. You have an objective value or purpose. One kind of gives you chains. The other one kind of is like, I have no strings on me. I can decide exactly what to do with my life. Like I get to decide my fate. The way that I put it on Twitter, if I can remember, I think I might just have to look real quick because I haven't said it in a while. I don't even see my pinned tweet. Well, I forget.
Is that in your bio?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I'm blanking on my own quote.
You must really believe in it then.
Yeah, I know, right? No, it's something like
I'll get it up for you. Hang on, I'll get up your profile. Oh, I'm on Grey Skeptic's profile. I'm stalking.
Yeah, I really can't remember it. It's bothering me that I can't remember it. But it really sums up my nihilism and attaches it like to my atheism.
Yeah. It's not on there anymore. This says answers in the grey area now. But I think I remember, it's something like oh crap.
Yeah, I know. It was up for so long, and like I thought it was
caring.
Pretty sure it was for a long time. Okay, well, I'll think of it here in like 5 minutes and I'll just blurt it out. But really, it kind of just speaks to that view in nihilism, but in a positive way. If excuse me, if you don't have to answer to a higher power, if you don't have this objective call in the universe, well, as sad as that is, it's really quite liberating. You just have the freedom to decide how to live your life, and all you really have is this subjective life on Earth and all these bodies around you that you get to intermingle with. So you just have this and just make the most of it, or don't. It's really up to you. I mean, if you don't, the universe doesn't give a shit. But you can really view it in a positive way, and I appreciate that. So I guess just that little foundational block that I have kind of can feed or counter argue anti-natalism, like at its core, I think. because, yeah, our lives don't really necessarily mean anything to the universe, but at the same time, it's kind of cool that you're here. And a lot of people may hold the view of like, yeah, I've definitely had more negative in my life than positive, but the positive has been so nice that I would do all the shitty stuff again. But then you have people on the other side, like rationality rules. Yeah, Stephen has said, I kind of wish I had never been born, kind of deal. And I totally respect that, because if someone honestly holds that view, I'm sure they hold it for a reason. People who hold this view of anti-natalism, natalism, I said it, natalism. They, I never want to say that they don't sincerely hold the view, because I think it is perfectly logical. Though I definitely disagree with it. And I don't think that, I think it should be talked about a little more, because I think that more people may agree with it than you would take at face value. Because
quite probably. My issue with it is what you remember from my video, and I just have to say really quickly, Native Atheist, hello, in the chat said I typically don't watch videos where comments are disabled, and it was a hard decision for me to make, but I did at the time. I just it was just a lot, and so I either hopefully can reinstate the actual comment section, but and I know people are going to probably have an opinion on that. The fact that I'm a YouTuber, I should expect so, but I'm the one that's having to deal with it, and worrying and feeling anxious about what sort of message is going to come next. So I'm sure you can understand, certainly on a human level, that I felt the need to sort of just back away and just. Luckily, I don't have notifications coming up on my phone every time I get a comment. It's more I have to sign in, and it just became something that I used to enjoy. And I was like, oh God, what's going to happen now? Something, what are they going to accuse me of now? And so yeah, that's why I did that. But hopefully, I can actually reinstate them, because having had time to think about it, it was never that I agreed with what they were saying, or that what they were saying technically hurt me. I think it just tapped into this sort of parental sort of fear. It's like literally like saying to somebody you're a bad human for what you've done, which they can say that about anything, but when it pertains to obviously something personal to me, which is parenting. So now that I feel a bit more centered about it, I think I will either reinstate the comments or open it back up, or perhaps do another video about it. But it was interesting what you were saying, Mac, because my issue with it isn't the fact that I'm saying that there isn't suffering. And like you said, even with all the crap that we've likely all gone through, I think quite a few of us might say, you know what, I'd put up with it for the joys. It's such a subjective thing, and suffering is such a subjective thing. But the people that were responding to my video, from what I gather, because it was almost becoming like copy and paste comments from different people, all of life is suffering. Literally, that's incredibly, I don't want to say myopic, perhaps that's the wrong word, but tunnel visioned view. Not only is that the way they see it, but that's the way for everybody else. And like I said, although in the community, I want to say the community, or the people who follow this sort of way of thinking, that there's different variations of people, there are those who literally would say if they were given a button to end the world now, they would do it. So whilst that sounds rather genocidal, it speaks to me about the very sort of, again, subjective view. They're saying this is what they think. Now everybody else is going to be involved in my personal decision regarding them, which is ironically what they were sort of accusing me of sort of like putting my perspective on my unborn child when they're putting their perspective on my unborn child. So that's why I don't find it convincing, because there's a lot of them are saying that all of life is suffering. When I say suffering, I don't just mean the big things, sickness and economic disparity and things like that. Even David Benatar, I think, describes sort of the banal nature of life, being stuck in traffic, paper cuts, stuff like that. I don't think he said that. I think somebody else did. But
paper cuts are
so centered
awful.
on. Exactly, it's so centered on literally all the. Yeah, I mean, I can think of loads of things, but so I'm not living in this bubble. I haven't had the easiest life myself, but it's brought me here. It's just, I know it's perhaps a romantic way of looking at it, but they're telling me my reality. I was explaining mine, but I wasn't saying you should feel this way. And I understand that the nature of, conversing. So I did say, I finished at my end of video and said, let's carry on the conversation. And that's not what happened. I think I had one person who was a proponent of antinatalism who actually asked some questions, which was still very binary, very one-sided. He was saying things like, you noted about economic issues, you shouldn't really have children if you live in a poor area or war-torn areas and things like this. And he said, but you don't explain what we should do about this. And I thought, in an 8.5-minute video, I'm going to go over the economics of most third world countries. It just was like, really? But he asked the question, and I was glad for that. And then he said something about when I explained about it being like a binary thing. Life, suffering, bad, non-existence, good, when you can't experience pleasure and you don't exist, that sort of thing. And he said, you don't point out why it's bad. And I thought, well, the very reason I'm discussing this is because it seems there's entirely no nuance to the entire subject of suffering and pain. There's no in between. It's one, suffering and pleasure. It's one or the other. And you're describing a world that I don't live in. It may be the reality, but that's not my experience, not my empirical experience. So that's sort of what I meant by that. So although he was questioning me in a very pleasant manner, and hard-hitting as well, and I appreciated that, but he was allowing the fact that he was an antinatalist to perhaps, I think, colour his view into trying to find mistakes, or rather not necessarily mistakes, in my discussion of the theology, because I started the video saying I'm literally just learning about philosophy in the past year, so I'm in no means an expert, and I try to put across that a lot of this is just me being curious. I'm not an expert in the whole thing, and so don't expect me to have an absolute decision, an absolute stance on certain things. And although I do find antinatalism, at least taken to its supposed logical conclusion, to be quite a dark thing, I can certainly understand. We can all understand suffering. It sounds good. I'm against suffering, but they make out that that's all there is. A lot of the people that were responding, and I just don't agree with that. And they didn't like that, and they didn't like that I brought somebody else into this supposed world of horrors. And it just got pretty personal pretty quick, and that's one of the reasons I just disabled the comments. So it's not something I definitely enjoy doing, and I did write a little synopsis of what happened.
Right, in the description.
Yes, because I didn't want it to seem like I've made this video, you can't talk about it. And in there, I explained what happened. Perhaps I did that too soon because I was myself a bit reactionary. And I did put in there, look, if you want to discuss this, come to me on Twitter. I'd love to have a discussion, because I think there was just a general reactionary nature to a lot of the comments. So far, no takers. So who knows? Maybe they just wanted to put their 2 pennies worth in and then get on with their day. But it was...
Well, to be fair, there was at least one taker. And that was me. I was like, hey, you.
Yeah. Because it might be because you know me, but you're also a reasonable person, I think. And like you said, you agree with the antinatalist view in a sense, but you're able to actually put aside that to discuss the other aspects of pleasure versus pain. That's all I was asking. I wasn't saying life is a garden full of fairies and things. I wasn't saying that, and I'm totally on board with I think you should be as economically sound as you can in a solid relationship. I know some great single mums, but I also know that they've struggled a great deal. I know some single dads who have struggled a great deal. There's a lot of groundwork that you can do to become a great parent. It's one of the reasons I waited until I was in my 30s. Physically, I'm healthy, never suffered from any major issues, except some mental health stuff, but even that was in regards to life events rather than it being a hereditary thing. There's not a lot of mental health issues hardly any from my family, and even medical stuff, we're all really quite healthy. And the same with my husband's family. So we were really lucky, and we know that not everybody's like that. And it doesn't mean that people can't have children in that capacity, but it's certainly something to think about. So I wasn't completely against the idea, but I just didn't like the fact that they were saying, nope, all life is suffering. How dare you, bring in a child to this world. It's horrible. So that's my stance currently. You're muted.
I didn't mute myself. Okay, sorry. Hi, welcome back.
Hello. Mac. You're getting the word in for once.
I mean, I like just letting other people talk. You're way smarter than me anyways. So where I want to take this real quick is because anti-natalism, natalism, see, I did it. I've done it again. Natalism. It's kind of like a keyhole to like get other views as well, because no one. Yeah. So let me start here. Let me start here with the definition. And I brought this up on Google and on Bing for anyone who wants to know. And Bing was just like a Google search. So I'm gonna read it. It's the same thing. They just both take the definition from Wikipedia, in case you know. I just thought it'd be funny to bring a thing. So the definition via Wikipedia is anti-natalism. Natalism is the philosophical position that assigns a negative value to birth. Anti-natalists argue that people should abstain from procreation because it is morally bad. In scholarly and literary writings, various ethical foundations have been presented for anti-natalism, and I guess I didn't need to read that sentence, but it's fine. The main point is that they think that procreation is like a net moral negative here. So that can go into a few other things. Like a lot of them are very pro self-suicide or assisted suicide.
Yeah.
Many of them are just pro, I would imagine, like, let the global warming keep happening because, like, fuck it, we fucked it up. We should go ahead and suffer.
It's not actually. They are supposedly their main stance is to alleviate suffering. So they don't actually want people to suffer then die. They just don't want them to have suffered then die. But I know what you mean, because there is a misanthropic nature to it. Not all of them, but there is this sort of why, we're the worst thing to ever happen to the universe sort of thing. So do you see what I mean? There's so many different viewpoints for it. So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a more than fair correction there. Absolutely. Because they don't necessarily want any suffering, right? No. They want the least possible amount of suffering, and you get that in a lot of philosophical arguments, right? We want less suffering, or we want the best possible outcomes, and they honestly believe that not making someone be born, without their consent, we can't get, is a part of the best way to go through with that. That is the baseline. It is the procreation part. So if someone's really giving you any more than the procreation is bad argument, they may just be getting into the fringes of anti-natalism. So I would like everyone to be a little cautious when you're talking about it with anyone who is a anti-natalist. Make sure you know what the basis of the argument is, and then if they go into anything else, I don't really want them to muck up their own stance that they're fighting for. Like, understand where it's coming from. I think that's important because it's really easy to paint any philosophy in a really negative light, and this one especially. And though I disagree with it for the most part, I think it really does have fair points, and it should be argued and discussed very carefully and respectably.
Respectfully.
Yeah, respectfully, yes. So something that I would like to jump into, though it isn't specifically the procreation part of the argument, because there's really only so much you can do about that, but we'll come back to it, is the topic of assisted suicide. Because I am, like, I guess I don't know where I would place that in my moral values and philosophy having stances. But I do like advocate for that. Like I do support that view. I think that at least past a certain age, maybe like 26 or so, when the brain is fully developed, if life just sucks for you, or if you have cancer and you're going to die anyways and you don't want to suffer, you should have that option of assisted suicide. And I know I'm pretty sure Canada has a really good system for that. Like, you have to go through some paperwork, like, it's very obviously that you have chosen this. Like, we don't want anyone mistaking it for like murder or vice versa, right? So you need to be safe and responsible legally before you do that for the people around you. And also, like, it's a good way to, like, say goodbye if you get to choose your time of death, because a lot of people would like to be like, well, I want to keep living, or I want to decide when I'm going to die. I think in a world where you have this anti-natalist view, and we can accept it, I think a good balance to, like, appease that, if for no other reason, we should have that option, that out for people who just like, well, life sucks and we don't want to be here, or we want people to have an out. I feel like assisted suicide is a good topic to bring up and a good out to have for some people. What do you think about my ranting here?
No. I it's obviously, it's not the most yay thing to talk about, but
we only talk rainbows and butterflies here.
Exactly. Yes. No. It's everything about this whole thing. To me, it's almost like the control of personal freedom. I chose to have a child, and whilst she's obviously a sentient being of her own, and I'm her caretaker, that was my choice, my freedom to free society to be able to become. Pregnancy isn't controlled, there's not a eugenics system in place or anything like that. So that was my freedom. Also, the freedom, it's your life. If you want to end it, I'd rather, obviously, people, if it's a case of, their life's in the shit, if there's anything we can do, fantastic. I want to be able to help them. And obviously we have things in place. They could definitely be better, even in the West, certainly in the West. But it's their life. It's whatever they want to do. The problem is, and this is something that anti-natalists, again, sort of, it's a horribly circular way of thinking, but they say we can't kill ourselves because that will cause more suffering for people around us. So literally everything is just awful, because they can't escape the awfulness that is life without creating awfulness for other people. So
right.
it's a real, yeah, exactly. So in that sort of sense, I mean, I don't know, if somebody came to me and said, look, I'm really suffering, I don't think it's going to get better, I'm going to end my life, and I had no control, or I couldn't convince them otherwise, perhaps it would be selfish for me to want to keep them around just for myself. So those sorts of discussions obviously are, hopefully we don't have to have in our lives, but why should what I want from somebody, if they're suffering? I suppose you could say the same about illness. If like I said, if people are at the end of their life due to illness, they could definitely decide, and pretty much anyone would understand that. But when somebody who might be physically healthy but is suffering mentally, or is in chronic pain but will perhaps live a long life despite that, who am I to stop them? So it is it's just part of the human condition, and it's shit, but it's something that we can at least come together on. And I think having this sort of really sort of tunnel vision view of it is part of the reason that people see it that way, that there is no escape. Much like nihilism. And it's funny you mentioned Stephen Woodford earlier, Rationality Rules. Bless his heart, he's been helping me through this, as he's no stranger to controversy, certainly in the YouTube comments. But although he explained that, exactly, oh yes, yeah, he was the man to go to. But he sort of explained, well, he said in my video, my interview with him, and I tagged that into the end of my Anti-Natalism video, that he did indeed say he'd rather not have been born, but now he's in it. So he's taken what he's been given and he's fashioned his life, and he's very happy. He's been through nihilism and worked through that. So to me, it's all about progression. And certainly 100 years ago, I'm sure if you asked any person of a working class, at least a working class standing, how is your life, they'd probably say pretty crap, especially in a relative sense to ours. I can talk to you over in another country, pop on Netflix, use my microwave, all these wonderful things that I've got now that make my life a bit better. Do we still have problems? Absolutely, but not compared to even 50 years ago. So it is all relative, but I think just people forget about the progression, how far we've come, and how ironically how they say about, you can't get a child to consent to being born, or they you don't seek their consent to bring them into the world. But if you could, and they said, yes, I'd quite like to live, what would be the answer to that? Because it's an experiential thing. You can't know whether or not you're going to enjoy something, or to at least be able to make an informed decision if you haven't already experienced it. A zygote doesn't know what life is like. So it's almost like self-defeating. You see what I mean? That's why I don't hold it in high regard. That is the self-defeating nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, because that is a very, very good counterpoint to it. But the counterpoint to that is also you can kind of tell a little bit. You can look at the environment around you. You can look at your living situation, what you can offer a child, another living being with a fair amount of consciousness. You can tell if you're going to give it a good life or not, at least a good start. So should should some people procreate, and that's really where this tends to lead. I think this is probably like the first place this kind of conversation goes is, well, at least not everyone should procreate, right?
Who decides, and what's the criteria?
Exactly.
Is it a human right?
Right. And I think more or less it is, because I just kind of go with nature on this. Like any other animal, I think we have the right to do that. Like, right by nature, we have that right, because we are animals. So though we should hold ourselves to a higher standard, we do have those urges, and we do have those rights to do that. But we do need, just like we need to decide how many kids are we going to have, how many can I really provide for and give a decent life to, can you do that for any, right? And I think most people would agree with this. But where I start to disagree, because one of my principles is anti-authoritarianism. I don't want to necessarily set standards. I would like to set maybe guidelines, weak standards, more or less, because as much as we need to balance our lives, when you start taking any kind of road to authoritarianism, or really set standards for birthing, that's just the American rights worst nightmare, and also bread and butter to scream and cry about birthing rates. But it really is an important thing to talk about. And like I said, I think the point that you brought up is absolutely fine, good, and the right point to make, because if you do talk to a zygote or your future children, and they say, "Well, yes, I would like to be born," then you would want to give them that chance. But that's kind of what you want to do anyways. Most of the time, if like you are trying to plan to be a parent, you are thinking, I want to give this person a decent life. Like I want them to have the least amount of suffering. How can I do that? How can I be a better parent than my parents, whether they were good or bad? And how can I really set them up for a successful life? Like that's what I would say 98% of parents at least think. At least those who are trying to be a parent. Obviously there are a lot of parents who don't or didn't want to be parents before they became pregnant or got a girl pregnant, right? But for that, to really try to counteract that so we don't fall into this anti-natalist view or have the child fall into an anti-natalist view, like I wish I hadn't been born, like it's not worth what what I've gone through for the little bit of good that I have, is abortion, is assisted suicide later in life. Like I think we should have these options open, even though I think religion really gets in the way of abortion, and then just the group suffering, and also religion gets in the way for the assisted suicide to really counteract it. I think they really need to be options, at least in this conversation. But I think like real world application, we really should have those outlets.
Yeah, I think when it comes to things like mental health, it's such a shame because it's I think perhaps you can attest to this being in America, given that a lot of your medical stuff is obviously based around insurances and things like that. So some things come up on a higher sort of a hierarchical tier of what's more important in terms of healthcare and stuff. And even as a small country ourselves, there are areas in the country that lack for mental health services in the UK. Technology has been an amazing sort of benefit in this area, because there are apps, even more so than a couple of years ago, that are designed to help people with mental health issues if they can't afford to see a therapist, if the waiting list on the NHS is too long, especially when it comes to things like depression and stuff like that. There can be a clock on it, which sounds rather dire, but that's exactly the nature of wanting to kill yourself. It's usually a pretty immediate feeling, especially if you're about to. So being told you'll have to wait at least 6 weeks for an initial assessment probably isn't the best news. So things like that, chat rooms and stuff like that, for fellow sufferers and things like that are great. The internet gets a bad rap sometimes, and it certainly helps to develop sometimes these very tunnel vision, singular ideas, incels and so on and so forth, that allow to propagate and become perhaps issues. But for medical stuff, I think the internet has been fantastic, and you can get apps on your phone, CBT apps, ones based on mindfulness for free, some of them $3.99 a month. So when you consider the help that is available to you in America, it's obviously a very expensive thing, therapy, isn't it? And it might not be the right one for you. The person giving you therapy might not be right. But I think we need to put even more effort into mental health. Not necessarily just once there's a problem, but building a good mental health foundation for children. And in the UK, I'm not sure how far it's actually spread out and whether or not it's going to become the mandatory thing in schools here. But I remember last year, one of our major newspapers reported that, was it mindfulness? Mindfulness mixed cognitive behavioural therapy, in case anyone doesn't know, work really well together. And they were going to be started to be rolled out, being taught and being instructed to reception age children, which is your kindergarten over there. And I think that's great, because I think a lot of times in life, including myself, and it really made me think about this whole kerfuffle, that there's probably times in my life where I've suffered unduly because of my perception of something that happened. So it's not to say that the thing that happened shouldn't have affected me, but it may have affected me more because of my just the way I am, my temperament, my level of understanding. I think Jordan Peterson said once, and I think I kind of agree with him. He said you can't have PTSD if you're not naive. You have to be naive to get PTSD. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how that works clinically, but he was sort of saying that you become surprised by something so much that it completely rocks your world. So he used naivete as a sort of like beginning thing to that structure, and I thought that was quite interesting. So how much of the suffering in my life was as bad as I thought it was? It's all about perception, and if we can help people see things in a healthy way, not make assumptions, get clearer answers to things, become more resilient to issues later in life. Imagine an entire generation like that. That's obviously bearing in mind that, depending on their home life and things like that, but as children at school spend a lot of time at school. So if they're able to learn that sort of standing as small children, then go out into the world, I think that would be an incredible achievement. And it can obviously get better because we're learning more about how the brain works in terms of neurotransmitters and things like that. So if people have genuine issues with things like serotonin levels, then we can identify it. But the thing about CBT and mindfulness is that they've been shown to be just as, and sometimes more, beneficial than medication. So it's an incredibly powerful tool that we've got here that we can yield that doesn't technically cost anything. So I think that's a great thing to push forward. The only other thing is that I was just remembering what they were saying. Some of the anti-natalists, how they were thinking.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, you go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so actually, first, before I forget, the meaning of life is what you make it. No higher power needed.
There we go.
That's my quote. And I feel like that's a decent quote to bring up here. Is the meaning of life is what you make it. No higher power needed. But that doesn't necessarily speak to the nature of anyone's problems, right? Like, I don't want to sound too Friedman about it, because like you can't necessarily always make your life better.
No.
There's many people, especially like if you're watching YouTube right now and you have the internet and you have a decent standard of living, you do have the means to make your life better. But sometimes it's a trade. Like it's not as easy as pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of idea.
No.
So yeah, no, yes, yes, no. I do want to point out though what Kelly is what she's getting at here. It's not. I want anyone watching who is an antinatalist. We're not coming at this as a way like this is something we're trying to cure. Like this isn't a philosophical cure. Like we're not just trying to give you ways to get out of antinatalism. Because I feel like someone may take it that way. So I want to make sure we nip that in the bud just a little bit. But we are trying to discuss tools of how to alleviate suffering, right? So stuff like the mindfulness apps and like studies that you can get into, things like assisted suicide, things like abortion can alleviate suffering, especially if you know something awful is going to come of that child's life just by it being born, or if you know you cannot handle this, having a child, or the 10th or 11th child, or any children at all. These are good things to have to alleviate suffering in relation to this topic, not just trying to poke holes at at the philosophy as a whole. So
No.
I don't think we were like leaning that way or anything, but I do want to reiterate for anyone watching who is worried about our views that we also want to alleviate suffering as like humanists.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just want to restate where we are coming from, what we are aiming at, to really try to avoid that those extra arguments that we don't even really need to have in the comments below. If we're lucky enough to get those.
Yeah. Oh God, you never know what they might be like. No, it's. I think that's one of the reasons why all the kerfuffle did make me think. And in the video, I expressed, the idea behind if you have medical conditions, if you that can be passed on to children, you've really got to think about these things. Can it seem, is it selfish? You want a baby, but you've really got, and it's one of the reasons I waited until I was in my 30s. And I remember saying to my mum, I think I only want to have a child when I know that I can teach it as much as I can about life. And I didn't feel that way in my younger years. I wasn't financially solvent in my younger years. I chose what I thought to be the appropriate time. And of course, it's one thing expecting a baby, another thing when they turn up. But then again, your attitude changes to be able to make the idea behind parenting, at least any half decent parenting, is to alleviate any unnecessary strife that they may go through, and oftentimes at detriment to yourself. But that's what I have done. That's my that sounds terrible when people say, oh, it's a sacrifice to have a child, because you sacrifice your time, sacrifice your finances, sacrifice other things. Not only is that not necessarily true for some people in terms of, you have to sacrifice hobbies and things like that. You don't. You just have to, organize yourself better or stuff like that. But it's a sacrifice worth making. And two, yes, you are in control for a time of taking care of something that is completely unaware of what's going on in the world, and to help them not only be happy, which is the most important thing. Her happiness means more to me than my own. And I can say that of her father as well. And not everybody has parents like that. And I wish they did, because people do deserve to be loved. And I do, again, alleviating suffering. I'm a humanist. But you put forth into your children the ability to become their own people. And then they've got to go out and not hurt other people. So you've got a heck of a responsibility. When they're little, when they don't know much, you teach them, then they've got to go out and make their way into the world. So it's not, like, I've had one, aren't you cute? It's a lifelong commitment. And that's one of the reasons I'm pro-choice. But the anti-natalist, or some of the anti-natalists, I should say, because it's as broad as anything. People could talk about nihilism and you have 10 people with 10 different definitions, in a sense, as to how it pertains to them. And they, you've got the ones on the far corner who literally call people breeders, who they find it disgusting. Literally, these are the kind of words they're using. They find it disgusting when they see pregnant women. They run past baby clothes stores because they find it sickening. So people with real dark ideas, and then the other people on the other side.
Well, I also run past those stores because they're expensive and they're a deep dark hole that I don't want to go down.
No, but you can see the sort of far end, and then there's other people saying, well, why don't you adopt? I don't know how many antinatalists have actually adopted. I'd love to see the statistics on that. But
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'll let you finish. And
no, go ahead.
Okay. That's something that I really wanted to talk about, because I commented in a video that I watched last night from the friendly anti-natalist.
Anti-natalist, yeah.
Yes. In my view, this is a philosophical stance. So you can and probably should adopt if you're an anti-natalist, because it's the procreation argument, not the parenting argument, right? So if you want to alleviate suffering, then I feel like you should have, absolutely, you should want to adopt. Like, that should not be discouraged in that community. And I'm not saying that people don't, but if you are an anti-natalist and you want to reduce suffering for everyone, like especially children, then I would encourage you to adopt. I would encourage you not to argue against it, because I think that is not logically sound. That I will argue quite a bit. It does not sound logically sound at all to me. So because that's really a non sequitur for someone to bring that up in an argument against antinatalism. Like I think you would really be misconstruing the argument if you said, well, then are you against adoption? Because like obviously I don't think you should be with this view. But I did want to point that out. I was thinking about it last night, and you reminded me of it.
It would be interesting. It would be interesting to find out how many you have. But the problem is that wouldn't solve their issue, because although that would alleviate some suffering, their argument is that people really should just stop, because it's just adding to the suffering. People should just stop having babies, adding to the suffering. There's only so many people that can adopt other children. And the funny thing is that although I centered the video around the fact that I'd had a child biologically, I didn't say that I hadn't adopted. So there's an assumption, unless perhaps in the video it didn't seem like I had. But it's like I said, it's an 8.5 video. It's not going to be a massive comprehensive coverage of antinatalism, and there's pictures of cats coming, flashing up. So we're not talking a super serious sort of thing, really. But there was so many assumptions, like most videos or comments can be. So many assumptions without really having a reasonable reaction time to it. It's a very sort of like, should I wait for a few minutes before I comment, sort of thing. I think perhaps some people probably didn't even watch the video because the title, which probably sounded a little bit clickbaity, but it was the nature of the video, was I wrong to have a baby? And of course, if you're an antinatalist, your answer is a yes. So some of them might not have even watched the video and have just gone straight to the comment section. And it did seem like they were just like saying the exact same things with slightly different wording, torture, suffer, illness, sickness, death, selfish ego, and up to the point of, oh well, you only had one because it had to come out of you, and talking about my labour parts and stuff. It was just, they're not there to discuss. They're there to cast, all these sort of aspersions upon my character and my want or need. Somebody even said, nobody wants children. That's ridiculous. Okay, he said we want basically our biological drivers to have sex, and
that is ridiculous.
I am not disagreeing on the biological thing, but he was sort of like telling me why I had to, and I thought, okay, if it is a biological urge that I can't control, how is that then my fault? And then also I thought, no, there are people who have perhaps a biological urge but decide against it. So the logic doesn't really sort of stand. I'm being boring, obviously. You're yawning.
Well, I mean, humans are very unpredictable. Like, you can't really put two humans in a bucket, because we don't make large enough buckets. You can't put two humans in a room and be like, all right, these two specimens are the perfect example of humanity. Like, two aliens can't just grab you and me and be like, all right, this is what humanity was, right? Because we agree with each other on at least 70% of topics, and there's so many other viewpoints out there. But so two things, because I would like to wrap this up before an hour and a half if we can.
Sure.
Because I don't want to keep you all day, and I also want to make sure Naja gets some time before bedtime. But first thing I want to say
with you, Mac, this is the thing. The problem is that I feel like I'm just talking to you because it's such a lovely conversation. I forget there are other people watching and that we're on any type of clock. So it's your fault for being so funny.
Well, I appreciate that, and I love talking to you, Kelly. This is always wonderful. We always have really good, creative,
reasonable conversations.
Yes. I do want to say that your video, though it's like just 8.5 minutes long and it has some cats and it's a depressing topic, I think it was a very, very fair layout of the argument. It was very fair. I really think anyone who wants to know about the topic, anyone who agrees or disagrees with it, but just wants to look into it just a little more, really should look at your video. It was such a fair video. I save a lot of the videos I watch on a different playlist, but I think I saved yours on like 2 for this one because it was really like I think I saved it as like a reference and then like 4 arguments and stuff because I had so many different playlists, but I had to save it in a few different spots because it was really informative and it was very, very fair. So I really want everyone to go and watch that video. And you should disable the comments because I think you're going to get better chats now down there in the comments. I hope anyways. So because I do want to encourage people to comment down below in your video, but in a constructive manner, please. The other thing, if you don't mind carrying this forward and to the right,
Sure.
I would like to talk about religion and like pro-lifers and birthers, I guess, in relation to anti-natalism, because I think that's a really interesting topic. And also, I would encourage, not if you have any time, to maybe break off the video at about this point, because anyone who's looking at this from a religious aspect, this is a really good part. And I'm like, I wish we had this at the beginning because it would bring you in a little more to talk about this. So watch the rest of the video if we do break this off. I think that having like at least like a Christian view. He's like, I'm so not doing any cutting or editing of this video. Okay, well, hopefully I can at some point once I get my editing stuff back up. But I think looking at it from a religious standpoint, you would probably be against anti-natalism. Is that like a fair view, like just face value, Kelly?
If I was that way inclined, which you know I'm not, but it's very simple. It speaks against the anthropocentric nature of our existence. That we're pretty important. Multiply and be plentiful. That sort of idea behind religion, otherwise known as get more and more members if we can. So it's complete stark contrast. But also in a sense of, it's actually, I was speaking to my husband about this because when I told him it was still bothering me, and he said, comments are just opinions and stuff. And I said, I know, but it was it's bothering me and I couldn't figure out why. And he said, you've got to see it like this. Religion is an ideology based on the idea that you look for a higher meaning, a different perspective to perhaps help you with suffering. And so in that sense, religion is very interesting to me because for a lot of people, that's what it can do. It helps them, it gives them a sense of community. It makes them feel, it can make them feel all sorts of negative things, but it can make them feel a part of something and taken care of and watched over. Whereas, so an answer to life's woes, or at least a balm or a salve to sort of alleviate some of the suffering that can occur. Because if you do take that away, then obviously life can be pretty scary for you. Although it's in direct contrast, I can see why one exists to point towards the pluses of life and being thankful for what you do have, which is good. There's never been a bad thing, but the other side is so aside from that. So they're incredibly two things that clash incredibly. And when it comes to pro-life, essentially that can be seen as suffering because there's people who shouldn't have children in terms of medical issues. It's odd. One is alleviating suffering by not having children. One is sort of potentially pushing for the suffering to make people have children that they weren't ready for. So if anything, it's like the ultimate battle, really. Sort of, I don't want to say the light side and the dark side because it's not a Star Wars here. They're both pretty weird ways of looking at things. But to me, it comes all down to choice. And while my daughter couldn't choose to come into this world, it was my choice to bring her in here. It's also my responsibility to give her the best thing in life I can. And then if she chooses personally to alleviate herself of this world, as much as it would hurt me, she's her own person once she grows up, and she's her own person now. So both options take away choices for me. That's what I think. And not only inhibit personal freedoms to people who follow it, but seek to control everyone sort of this way, central or on the periphery of how they think. That's the issue. Both sides say alleviate suffering. They also push the way they think on other people. And that's an issue.
Yeah, it is. Because I don't advocate for anyone, like I don't like support anyone having that option other than you for any of it, for like deciding what you believe or having children. Like that should be up to said person always. That said, my view on it is like, especially thinking more right winger for this, the American right winger, is I see like the extremists more. They're more worried about like birthing rates and make sure that each race or their race has the right, like a good amount of children to for like population wise or whatever, which I disagree with on its face. But that is definitely not anti-natalist unless they're thinking of like maybe other races, but that's still not anti-natalism. That's just racism. And then on just the pro-life side, I feel like it is kind of not really a counter argument, but it's definitely a counter position to anti-natalism. When quoting a Mel Brooks film, every sperm is sacred. When you hold that view, you don't need to masturbate into a sock because every sperm is sacred. You can't miss a period because every sperm is sacred. I think it was Mel Brooks. I'm sorry. Maybe it was Monty Python.
No, it's Monty Python. Every sperm is sacred, yes.
Oh,
yes.
I apologize. My bad,
as a
guys.
Brit, if I didn't know that, I would be thrown out into the
I should be thrown out. But no, yeah, that stance is definitely antithetical to anti-natalism. So I guess knowing that, or really strongly believing that, how do you get pro-lifers or birthers even to take this argument in a serious way? I guess is kind of what I want to do. I want to try to understand how to get this argument discussed in a civil way and to make sense a little bit to people who hold those views. Every sperm is sacred. Please have all the babies. Because environmentally, we know this is not sound. We can only hold, such and such a population on this finite world that we have, but that doesn't even hit with a lot of Christians, because a lot of, at least right wing Christians, like, they don't believe in global warming, or even that we even really live in a finite world. It might as well be flat with like an endless bottom. But how do we get just like the moral argument of anti-natalism to hit with the more fundamental Christian groups?
Well,
it's a hard question for you. I should have asked you beforehand.
No, and I'll try and be concise because you know what I'm like. No, I think there's so many problems with that, and not because I don't think people can be convinced, but it's more the fact that, like you said, it's all about the fundamentalist nature of it. And so whilst some anti-natalists can be so fundamental on certain aspects that all life is suffering and can't be convinced otherwise, you've got people on the other end who, think that our main purpose in life, especially women, is to have babies. You have pro-lifers or pro-birthers who know, who know that they're, who know that they are advocating for people who either aren't ready, shouldn't, for a myriad of reasons, have children, yet they want you to. So in a strange sort of roundabout way, like I said earlier, they are pushing more suffering, but see themselves as having a moral position. So it's incredibly odd. Both sides almost seem like an odd victim, like the ultimate victim complex, which probably sounds really harsh to say about certainly some antinatalists. Definitely, you can get a sense from them, things like their names in the chat rooms and things like that usually have some sort of dark sort of poetry to them. Their avatars, grim reapers and things like that. So there's probably likely a lot of them that are quite depressed. I don't think you have to be depressed to hold this view. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But you can. I think even a lot of the people who commented my thing, had that sort of way about them, if I remember rightly. One of them had the name "No Joy in Life," so that sort of speaks perhaps to that person's way of thinking. But it is like the ultimate victim complex, and it's the virtue signaling for the yet born. And on the other side, for the religious, it's the advocating for the as yet unborn. So I don't know. I think, like with a lot of these things, it's not necessarily convincing them the argument in itself, or even the morality of that argument. It's breaking down why they believe that, and also how it pertains to their belief, why that part is so important to that. Because there probably is Christians out there who have adopted instead of having children. So I don't think we can throw them obviously all under the same sort of thing, which kind of goes against, the whole go forth and multiply sort of idea. And I think it can be a bit confusing as well, because there is the nature of the fact that we're living longer nowadays, and there's going to be more old people, depending on what country you're living in and the demographics involved, than young people. So actually, there are some countries that are like, we need more babies, more children. So although in terms of population control, I can understand what you're certainly saying about there being too many people, for some countries, it's a detriment not to have more children there. It's not the reason to have children, but it's an interesting look at the sort of demographics of different countries. So I don't know. I think it's probably an epistemological argument rather than trying to get one to see the other for its morality. I think it has to go much deeper than that. You're not going to convince people, if you can't convince people that it's wrong that somebody should have a child, that they were impregnated by a rapist, their moral compass is kind of skewed already. They're so myopic in their view. So you're not exactly going to convince them of the antinatalist view either, I think. And
I agree with that.
I appreciate your efforts, though.
Yeah. Because, like you said, you are curious on how many antinatalists would adopt. I'm very curious on what percentage of antinatalists are Christian, like at all. I wonder if this is an easier pill to swallow, and just think about idea to toss around if you are not religious. Because I feel like it would be easier because you just have the ability, I guess. You have less chains tying on your mind to think about things like that. Give me just a second. I have a little boy who has a question for me. So if you want to reflect on that.
Hello, everyone.
He wants to know if they're going to have inside or outside recess today. And I'm not sure. It's pretty cold here. So, yeah.
Is it snowing?
It's not snowing, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, so jealous.
I mean, it's still dark. I can't even see outside. So,
oh my gosh, what time is it over there?
It's 7:30. It's
dude.
The sun's just barely coming up. I'm just getting some in the sky and it's cloudy.
That's so bad.
It's
just you. No, you come over here. You come over here.
I'll come on over. So I guess I would like to see, not that I'm going to get it, but I would like to see more people discussing anti-natalism. And like I said before, like I really support better education in our schools, especially in like high school and stuff, and like just anything like pre-college. We should be teaching more critical thinking. We should be teaching it, I think, through philosophy. And this is a view that I really think should be taught to kids around like maybe not when they hit puberty, but like maybe after they're like 16 or getting close to 18. This argument should really be posed to a younger audience, because I think the more set in your ways you get as you get older, the less likely you are to. Not that I want anyone to be an anti-natalist, quite the contrary, but I do want that argument in people's heads more, just to make better decisions. Like, well, I don't want to be an anti-natalist, but I do want to give my children the best possible, least suffering life that I can, because I've heard that argument and it makes a lot of sense. So I don't want to be fuel for a bad fire, right? I think it's a decent enough argument to make you think and want to practice against it. You should want to adopt because you want to alleviate suffering. If you do have children, you want the best possible life, and you want to set a good example and set someone up for success if you are going to have children. And I think the prenatalist position and argument being given and discussed, talked about more in the public sphere is important for that. You need to have the counter argument to work against, more or less, I suppose. Sorry, anti-natalists, natalists. But no, I think it is an important topic and an important stance, and I just really want both sides to really talk about it in a humane manner, in a constructive way, like we're trying to do here today, because I think it really is an important stance. Though I disagree with it, but I think just knowing the topic, the main point is just knowing the topic can alleviate more suffering, because it can help you make better decisions. Knowing that some people view their life as, boy, I wish I hadn't been born. I would not want to go through all this again for the good times, and I wish someone would have asked me, if they could have asked me, my consent before I was born. And just knowing the position more, having more ideas in your head is better for you, I think. So that's my.
Absolutely. I think the idea of some people were saying in the comments of my video, saying things like, oh, we're just conditioned by society to want children. That's likely the case for a lot of people. It wasn't for me. It was actually just an incredibly quite sudden yearning. That's the only way I can describe it. And it wasn't because I felt like I was running out of time. It was literally a feeling, like I couldn't wait to be pregnant. It was like electricity running through my body. It was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. And I sort of cover that in the video a little bit. But So it wasn't necessarily a societal thing to me. For some people it is, and that's wrong. You should do what is right for you and what you feel is right. And if people don't want children, I'm not one of those people that like, fine, just because I know how, I knew before, I've got nieces and nephews, I know the responsibility involved. So, if somebody doesn't want to and they want a life, fine. It's how you treat people on a daily basis. That's all I give a shit about. You can make life choices as long as they're not hurting anyone in the more specific sense, because there's BDSM, so that's another conversation. But do you know what I mean? The general suffering that we can all sort of pretty much attribute to, what can add to the world and make it crappier. You do you. That's where I'm standing. And I think I forget sometimes that because I myself don't hold strong ideologies or anything like that, mainly because I want to be open to all things, but also because I either don't find certain ones compelling, or I know the mistake that can occur when you have an ideology or you have a really strong opinion on something and it becomes fixed. And that seems to happen an awful lot with things like this, as I've experienced now. And I forget sometimes that not only can people get like that, get so behind a particular position that they can't see the nuance, which is such a tragedy to me. I love a bit of nuance, me, but it can get be almost impossible to convince them otherwise, and then it becomes like your battle. That's why I stopped the comments. It was no longer about a discussion. It was just about personal attacks, pretty much on baseless, sort of things like. One person said, because I said I would die for my daughter. I said I would literally die for her. If she needed all my organs, all my cells, they are hers. And it's not just out of love, but because I believe that she'll grow up to be a wonderful attribute to the world if she goes on the current course that she's on. I can't control what may befall her. That's fine, okay. But, not that that's fine, but I understand what they're saying there. You can't guarantee a great life for everyone. But I was told it was gross. Why wouldn't you die for anybody else's child? And I was like, first of all, I didn't say I wouldn't. And certainly depending on the circumstances, I may be able to save somebody from being run over and then get run over myself. But it was more the sense of like they shift the goalposts. So if you say that you give your life to alleviate somebody's suffering, well, why not that person? Why not that person? And it becomes to a point where you have to defend the position so much that you lose rationality. And that's not a discussion, is it, really?
No, yeah, it gets kind of off. And the way that I would counter that is just be very bluntly honest, is that, like, well, humans are naturally selfish to a point. Like, we're not completely selfish. Like, there's definitely some nuance. There's definitely some gray area. Definitely some gray area. The way that you would have to kind of explain it to someone to kind of recenter the argument, just like, okay, well, yeah, I would lay my life down for someone, but if there's 10 people in a burning building and I have time to get out one, if one of those was my kid, what do you think I'm going to choose? Just rationally, who's it, like, if you're the one making the decision, if you are the one making the decision, if you're trying to cause the least amount of suffering, you are going to suffer more if you don't save your offspring, given you like that offspring, right? So if you're trying to cause the least amount of suffering, well, you are saving yourself some suffering by saving your child over someone else's. That may be selfish, but it's also just logical. But even if it's selfish, it's fine. It's fine. That's your choice. That doesn't make it anything. Like, it's not really a good counter argument.
No.
Well, because I'm selfish. Oh yeah, well then what? I just said I'm selfish.
Maybe they should. Yeah, then maybe they should reword it to, rather than it being selfish, that there's no act that is completely that is selfless, that is completely unselfish, because you'll always likely have a net gain to it. I mean, that's another conversation entirely as to what constitutes that. But perhaps they should reword it, because of course it isn't selfish to give your life to save somebody else, just because it doesn't save this other person. And it's a strong evolutionary, biological and psychological thing that you'd want your DNA to continue. So I'm likely, by going into that fire, I'm compelled by love and all these other sorts of emotions, but compelled by, you know, a great deal of time and emotion, evolutionary biology imprinted on my cells to go in and save my offspring. It's just, it's, you know, even on that level, you can sort of understand it. So it's like, what are you even saying? You just want to tell me off for having a child. That's all this is.
Yeah, and that's the main point. That's the main point. Is that's what someone in that position would be trying to do. Because even going against or like taking out the biology part of just trying to save someone who's more important to you is a common thing, even if it's not my kid, but it's your kid. And I know, you know, one of those people in that building is your child. Well, then I would probably aim for that one, because that person would mean more to me. Like, if it just would, it would mean more to me. Not saying that person or my child has any more value in the universe than any other person. Like, there's two different ways to think about it. And when you're talking about an individual person giving their life for A, B, or C, you have to acknowledge that you are talking about a fixed person doing A, B, or C, not just a person doing A, B, or C, because it's going to be different for everyone. So that being said, I did want to add what Nacho Witness said in our Zoom chat here. He said, argument against all that shit. The richest of wankers still have butthurt suffering kids. You can't continue our species without suffering. So those who either are the richest of wankers or just the most just set up, like in any way, like there still is going to be suffering. It is your responsibility, if you're having a child, especially, to cut out as much suffering as you can, but have enough suffering in there for them to grow and know how to navigate the world, right? So there really is a lot of nuance in this topic, and that pretty much is a counter argument for anti-natalism. It's like, well, yes, I mean, suffering's a part of life, but everyone should have a chance at life.
Exactly. And the binary nature of it is the issue. The fact that when people say, "Oh, life isn't all suffering," their counter argument, a lot of them I see in chat rooms, is they say, "Well, yeah, but life isn't all bliss," and nobody mentioned that it's all bliss. It's, there's something to be said for just general contentment. Being content is probably one of the loveliest feelings I've ever experienced. A sense of well-being, a sense of being able to cope with what might come, to have learned from what has been. And I'm not saying that life is complete ecstasy. In fact, if it was, I think it'd be incredibly tiring. And that's, the peaks and troughs of life, that's what tells, informs us of who we are. Also, it teaches us how to navigate that so that we can then teach our children that. And I'm not disagreeing with them that there is suffering. And I'm lucky that I live in the West. I'm lucky that I have my health and all these sorts of things. But yeah, just the lack of personal choice and just the very binary nature of looking at it, because life isn't all bliss, it's all this, and there's all this wealth of experience, and nobody has the right to tell anybody else that they're wrong to try and experience that, good or bad.
So yeah, I think this has been a pretty fun conversation. I think I made a note.
Considering how depressing the philosophy is.
Depressing. This was exhilarating.
Yeah, well, I'm damn glad to be alive today.
Exactly. When Byron Brantley joined in the chat, he said, what time am I in? 5:45 a.m. and we're talking about suicide. Okay, I need coffee. And I came right back into the chat ever since. So some people like it. So one note that I made in here that I do want to mention, because this is kind of a belief I have. It's not like a firm principle, fundamental belief, but it is a nice thing that I think, is that I don't want to say it like a spiritual or goofy way. I believe that you live on through your children, like just like biologically, like a little bit like mentally. Like the closest thing I believe that you will ever get to immortality is like living on through your children, because literally a piece of you lives on through them, like DNA wise, and also you have the best chance of passing on a mindset that you have to your children, because you potentially get the most interaction with them in life, and you really help form that person. So I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, or it can be at least. So is that an argument or anything like that against anti-natalism? I don't think so.
Well, so they would see that as a very, I think, judging from what I've seen from certainly the types that seem to have commented on my video and in some of the chat rooms in the darker areas of anti-natalism, that's equally as selfish, wanting to live on through your children, sort of thing, which is a strange argument for me.
I absolutely agree, though. I absolutely agree. That is a selfish thing.
Yeah, but then that never even occurred to me, because I'll be dead. Yeah. Why do I care if not whatever I care, but I know I'm mortal. What I am interested in is this daily experience. How best can I make it the best it can possibly be? How can I make my reality, not what somebody else thinks I'm experiencing, but my reality, this mind that I have, the experiences I have, the best that can possibly be. And as a wonderful adage to the idea of being part of the human race, how can I then make it better for other people so that we can live quite nicely together? Crime and stuff not permitting, but that general idea, our daily lives, how can I make that better? Because that's all I'm experiencing. It's all I'm going to experience. And once I'm dead, that's it. I don't get this whole sort of, I guess I'd like to live for quite a long time if I can, but it's not the nature of mortality that bothers me. I'd love to see my daughter, and if she wants children, that'd be fantastic. But to me, just finding the key and finding what makes people happy, no matter what their circumstance. And I don't think it comes from money. I don't necessarily think it comes from sort of material wealth or material success in that sort of sense. And again, I'm not talking about bliss. I'm not talking about ecstasy. I'm talking about contentment that, helps your experiences be that much more pleasurable if they can be. So that's what I'm after. That's all I'm here to do, and hopefully that the experience then, permeates into my family, and they can do that for themselves as well. That's all I'm interested in, not this sort of idea of mortality. I wanted to imprint my DNA. My evolutionary biology and psychology might want to do that. It's in the back of my head somewhere, but it's not it's never been my position.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I get that. I just think it's a nice mindset to have, to try to do a good job and set a good example, and also maybe a way to kind of reverse that and think about, well, what happens, when my parents are gone? Well, they had me. I can do the best to be the best rendition of them that I can be. So like, there's different ways you can go with that philosophy. I don't know what it'd be called, but it's just a certain thought I like to keep in the back of my mind. To try to keep the best positives about things. So anyways, do you have anything else that you'd like to touch on the subject before we
I think I've covered it. I think if anybody does find themselves coming up against any anti-natalists, like any subject that's certainly heated, Stephen said this, he said, rationality rule said, whenever you speak about things that are just generally heated, which are most things, but things like trans issues, anti-natalism, politics, be prepared, because you're going to get people's emotional clout. They claim they're going to be rational, they claim this, that, and the other argument, but it comes from a place likely of, an emotional push, and they have a reason. Like, I think a lot of them perhaps have suffered, and I don't wish that upon anyone, but you can sort of tell their worldview is very much pushed, I think, by their lives. That's just an assumption perhaps I've made wrongly. They can convince me otherwise if they wish. But just to be aware that, they're likely not to be convinced of any other arguments. And I suppose, in a sense, these are people who are probably quite delicate already in terms of if they have suffered. So just take that humanist, I don't want to say high road, but take that humanist idea and say, you know what, this person is pushing for these ideas that I find dark, that I perhaps find dangerous and stuff. But as part of the human condition, we can all appreciate that we want to alleviate suffering. I don't want to add to this person's suffering. Whether they mean to or not, they probably don't want to add to mine. If that is truly their stance, if they don't want suffering, why would they be so mean, I suppose? But for me, coming out of it, it's taught me to perhaps look at the proponents of an argument, not just the argument itself, because sometimes they're one and the same. They shouldn't be, but there you go.
Yes.
And to perhaps do a touch more research in that area, so that I'm not quite so surprised and think, bugger. And just to be aware that, opinions can be incredibly strong, doesn't mean they're right. An ideology can seem very convincing, doesn't mean it's right. We have 1,000 ideologies, 100,000 ideologies out there. They all have their place, but it's whether or not they convince you, and don't be forced to be convinced either. So.
Yeah, that, and I'll try to just end it on this and not make a whole new conversation. But I made a video on Grey Skeptic, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, about labels.
Yes.
How they are as helpful as they are harmful, I think. Like, they're pretty damn balanced, because looking at the anti-natalist argument on its own, like just strictly by the book, it definitely makes some sense. It has some merits, whether you agree or disagree with it. There's definitely some meat there. But when you're talking to an anti-natalist, they may have a lot of views that they tie to it that another anti-natalist might not agree with whatsoever, right? If you're talking to a feminist, you may have to figure out and determine what kind of feminist they are, because there's like 18 different branches of feminism. Arbitrary number, please don't look it up.
Can we run one?
Yeah. Just to be clear and really get the point across, it's just like it is important to know the by the book definition, to know the actual argument. So like what Kelly started with is just what is antinatalism, and then what she got are the proponents, those who argue antinatalism. And sometimes it's two different things. Sometimes it is the same thing that you think. So really try to start. I think you should definitely try to start with what does it say on the front page. Really get that first. And then understand that most of these philosophical positions, whether it's antinatalism, feminism, humanism, anti-theism, theism, atheism, any of that, they are on a spectrum all to their own. People tie different things to them all the time. Like we did today, we didn't just talk about antinatalism. That would have been kind of boring and short. But when you attach it to different positions and occurrences around the world. It makes it more interesting, and also it starts to differentiate certain stances on that spectrum for that topic. So labels. So label yourself what you're comfortable with, but also like understand talking to two anti-natalists, like talking to two humans from different opposite ends of the earth. You may get two opposing views with someone who holds the same basic stance. I hope I stated that clearly and rationally.
No, you have, yeah. It's just a case of just remembering that just because it doesn't have a religious tie-in, so to speak, that the antinatalism itself, even when you know the exact exquisite details of the actual position, can be interpreted so many different ways, not unlike religion. So just remember that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important. So please remember that when you're trying to like find any label or just dive into anti-natalism or that community or any community. Understand it for the confusing reason, but also understand it for the trying to keep it civil reason. Because some people don't dive into just that part of it, of understanding when you agree, you may disagree as well. So just try to keep that in the back of your mind. It's really hard to have
I wasn't afforded.
If you don't agree.
I wasn't afforded any such luxuries with mine, hence the disabled comments. So yeah, I'm sure anybody who's been on YouTube can understand where I was coming from with that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, again, it was a wonderful video. You do wonderful work. You really, really try to be fair, and I really appreciate your channel and you as a person. And I think you know that. So if you will go ahead and tell everyone just a little bit more about your channel, where they can find you, and your Twitter handle at least.
Sure. Well, everyone, I'm the evil baby Heather right here. No.
That's your channel.
Yeah, so yeah, my channel's obviously fairly small. I like it that way currently, as I'm probably going to get a lot more people who come and comment and say interesting things. But no, it's basically a channel about philosophy. I'm learning, and you're going to be learning along with me in a sense. I apply philosophy to things like mental health, or how they sort of pertain sometimes to one another, and anything that sort of strikes my fancy, but it's usually got some sort of philosophical aspect to it. Or I do have some atheism videos, and I do speak. Sometimes I have reaction videos, things like to the Transformed Wife, but only when I find what she says in particular to be pretty abhorrent. But no, you'll find that I try to see things from different points of view, and that whilst I may put across an idea of how I feel, it's subject to change, on new information, as I'm, like all of us, or like most of us, I'm still learning. So yeah, it's pretty nice over there. My audio has gotten better as I've gone along. You can probably tell from my videos. So yeah, so if you fancy it, come on over. Please try and be nice in the comments, and if you want to chat, do chat with me. I'm on Twitter as well, Topic Thunder 1. I want a conversation, but I won't put up with you. So I just won't. I mean, who would want to? But especially on a mass scale like that. So just be as pleasant as you would be if you were in a pub with me having a pint. So if you'd offer me that, that'd be fantastic.
Please do. Be nice to Kathy. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning or tonight, wherever you are. We really, really appreciate it. Hope to have Kelly back soon. I like this time frame that we have. I need to have you. This is fun.
I feel bad that you're up so early though.
Nah, it's okay, because we don't really focus too much on the philosophy side of things, or religion very much on our Friday night shows. It's almost always politics. So it's nice to branch out a little bit and do this with you. It's fun. So I hope everyone enjoyed the show. I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday, Thursday, and we will see you back here Friday night. Until then, stay humanist for God's sake.